Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to Octavia Tried to Tell Us. A year later, we should point out, right? Isn't this basically our year
It
anniversary?
is. Yes, it was April, so it's kind of like mid-April. So it really is. I looked up and thank you, Facebook Memories, for letting us know that a year ago we said, "Hey, wouldn't it be interesting if we did a little webinar? Doesn't the world look like Parable of the Sower? Let's talk about it."
Yes. And
And we are still talking about it.
hopefully for a lot of people, the world is looking a little less like Parable of the Sower, but we also can't pretend that we're not still in a pandemic, that we're not still grappling with issues of how to thrive and create and support each other in times of crisis, as informed by the work of Octavia Butler, which is what this particular webinar series is all about.
So we are letting people come in the room, our virtual room. We see you coming. So
Hello,
please feel free to come in the chat. Tananarive loves the chat.
I do love the chat.
And tell us where you're from. And we will also get started and look forward to introducing our guests. As you see, welcome to Octavia Tried to Tell Us number 15. Can you believe it, Tananarive?
I can't. Time flies.
I know, we didn't have numbers on it. I wouldn't know. So this week, we're just going to let you know how we're going to order things. We'll start off with our introductions and we'll have our conversations. Many of you submitted questions ahead of time, but you can also put questions in the chat and we will look for those as well. If you're on social media, please use the hashtag OctaviaTried. We'll mainly catch it on Twitter. We always have great conversations happening on Twitter, a parallel conversation. As much as Tananarive wants to, we will not check it during the show, but we will check it after. We will check it afterwards and we'll be in conversation. You can also use it on Instagram. We catch it there as well. So please have a great conversation using the hashtag OctaviaTried. I am happy to introduce my friend, and I think I remember how to do this. Yep, there we go. Tananarive Due. She is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She's an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. A leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, Tananarive Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award. And her writing has been included in Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. She is married to author Stephen Barnes, with whom she collaborates on screenplays. They live with their son Jason and 2 cats.
The cats are still in there. That's great. Well, the Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman is a professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She's also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and initiate of traditional Yoruba religion. She works at the intersection of faith, culture, and social justice. She's the author or editor of 6 books and several articles and book chapters that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, A Womanist Theology, is required reading at colleges and universities around the country. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey with Faith and Depression, received the Silver Illumination Award in 2017. Dr. Coleman speaks widely on religious pluralism, religion and mental health, sexual and domestic violence, and navigating change. She lives in a lively intergenerational household where she is an avid vegan cook and cyclist. And we have a guest. I will introduce Morowa because, hey, I did a joint appearance with you when your book first came out. Morowa Yejidé, a native of Washington, D.C., is the author of the critically acclaimed novel Time of the Locust, which was a 2012 finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize, longlisted for the 2015 Penn Bingham Prize, and a 2015 NAACP Image Award nominee. Her short stories have appeared in the Istanbul Review, Ascent Aspirations Magazine, Underground Voices, the Adirondack Review, and others. Her story, Tokyo Chocolate, was nominated in 2009 for the Pushcart Prize, anthologized in the Best of the Willisden Herald stories and reviewed in the Japan Times. Morowa lives in the Washington, D.C. area with her husband and 3 sons. Creatures of Passage, her new novel, is her second. And wow, are you getting fantastic notice for that novel. So congratulations. Big write-up in the New York Times and probably the Washington Post too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably too many to name. So that's very exciting and congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be joining the two of you lovely ladies. You know, lovely ladies are few and far between.
Well, these days.
Yeah, these days anyway, folks who are still open and warm and very accomplished, but also very giving. So I salute both of you and appreciate you very much for that.
Well, we're glad to have you.
I mean, it's sad that there's a feeling that that's so rare now, you know?
It is sad. It shouldn't be happening, you know, but and as we get older, we notice that more and more, I think, at least I do. But I think I still have a lot of faith in our sisters, and I'm always still pleasantly surprised, and there's always wonderful gifts along the way. So we'll continue on, all of us.
Absolutely. And that's what this webinar series is all about, is holding hands to continue on, guided by the light of Octavia's work, but also our own light. So I don't know, Monica, I'm wondering if I have a very specific question about Creatures of Passage, but I'm thinking maybe we start more generally with your journey, Morowa, with Octavia and her work, what she's meant to you. Did you ever meet her, and how did you meet her through her fiction?
I didn't have the good fortune of meeting her, but I think I started with her like many other young people did. Her books opened up a new world. I always enjoyed science fiction, you know, since I was little kid. The natural world, the universe, and how it works. But I think her book, the one that struck me probably the most was Parable of the Sower. You know, it's a dystopian view. I still like dystopian stories because it's a way to not only imagine what could happen, but also to process and digest what has happened. And it's kind of a marrying of the two. I always enjoyed her sense of lessons of humanity and examining good and bad in society. And I think as a young person, you know, this was a long time ago, but as a young person, that struck me quite a bit, because I think many young people are trying to create a clear definition of what is good and what is bad. How can we move forward, and what keeps us back? And I think many of her stories were very much centered around those themes. So for sure, that would be, I mean, even one of the chapters in Creatures of Passages, it's called Parable of the Dreamer, because this woman they call her the death seer, so she can see how people will die. But she herself has a lesson to know and try to decipher. So I think if there was any an influence with Octavia, it would be her vision and her ability to examine human behaviors in societies. I particularly, as I got older and began writing, I was interested in the power relationships, the power dynamics, and how those power dynamics impact social interactions. You know, we can't talk about the social conditions that we're in without talking about the power structures and the political structures that create those social dynamics. So, you know, those are the types of things that centered me.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, when you talk about that, the unflinching eye, the person who can see death, that is, to me, a part of what, not everything that Octavia represented, that would be way too reductive, but I think what distinguishes her fiction is that she did have this unflinching gaze into those things that make us the most uncomfortable,
Yeah.
the things that we least want to think about, much less talk about and plan around. So yeah, I can totally see that. That's fantastic.
I'd love for you to share us about, no spoilers, but tell us a little bit about your recent novel so we can jump into all of this good writer creativity inspiration.
Okay, so Creatures of Passage is a literary fiction, magical realism story that centers in Washington, D.C. in the year of 1977. So it's very much centered around an African-American family in a community in Washington known as Anacostia. In the South, DC is divided into quadrants, 4 quadrants. And so I was very much fascinated with giving an unseen view, a less talked about view of Washington, DC. Most of media has done a tremendous job at giving a very monolithic view of Washington. It's all about politics or the CIA, but it's a very vibrant place full of people, everyday people who live out their lives, often under very extraordinary circumstances. So that's where the magical realism kind of comes in play with Creatures of Passage. Our heroine in the story, her name is Nephthys Kinwell, and she's a sort of a cab driver of sorts. She's a ferryman of sorts, ferrying passengers from one part of the city to another. She was largely inspired by my grandmother, who was one of the first 3 Black cab drivers in Washington, D.C. So I often wondered about the people who got into her car and the stories that went along with it. So Creatures of Passage is very much about a community moving through time, the Black community in a larger sense, moving from one generation to the next, and what happens, how it reverberates between those two. Time is very much a character in the story, and they're all centered around trying to save a young boy in the story. So you have ghosts, family members who come back through time to engage family members to try to save what's happening with this child. And the child represents the future, of course, his view, his sort of pure eye of processing what's around him and trying to understand that. So I think Creatures of Passage is really an invitation to walk on the wild side of an alternate view of our nation's capital and how Washington can look in proximity to the other states, which I call kingdoms. They often function as kingdoms. I always thought you have fiefdoms around the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia phenomenon is a very unique dynamic in this area. So all of those things kind of went into the pot for Creatures of Passage. There's a lot of interesting characters. Many of them are inspired by Egyptology. They carry, they have characteristics of Egyptian gods, and their behaviors are sort of driven by those things. But it's also very much rooted in the Washington that's how it's felt by everyday people, aside from the image of DC.
Right. So you have the magical elements and the sort of revisionist elements of the history, but also the real world grounding in, I don't know, is it a spoiler to talk about what Dash witnessed? But a real life trauma that happens that people witness, right?
We can say he did witness an act of molestation.
Right. Okay. So
he's as a kid.
Yeah, and how that has an impact. And 2 things I want to say. Sometimes it's not nice to compare writers to other writers. And you're getting all kinds of love, like, oh, reminiscent of Toni Morrison and all this kind of stuff. And that's fantastic. You are you. I wanted to say that outright. But given that this is the weekend that Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad is being released, it does strike me that the alternate history aspect, right? It's like the world, but with some changes, reminds me a bit of Creatures of Passage in all the best ways, right? So I'll just drop that there. But the other thing I wanted to say is, as someone who just spent 7 years trying to work on a novel and finally getting a novel finished and sold that will come out next year. Yay, finally. Thank you. But this isn't about me. This is about you. This isn't about me. It's about you. Morowa, you spent 17 years. So mine plus 10 working on this novel. So could you talk a little bit, because a lot of the people who watch this are creatives themselves, they're writers themselves, about the creative process and how you stick with it, what kept you going, but also sometimes what stopped you.
Oh yeah, because I didn't work on it continuously. It was off and on. Interrupted, you stop for motherhood, you stop for marriage, you stop for jobs, you stop for all kinds of things. Life gets in the way, or life is a gift, so you're preoccupied. I'll get back to my book. But it all kind of goes into the pot. My husband and I joke that Creatures of Passage is the fourth child. We have 3 boys, but this is the 4th child.
Yes.
And the book kind of grew up along with me and my family, and it morphed along with the city. The city changed over the years. My chapters changed over the years. I started it when our youngest boy was about 4 weeks old, and I finished it when he was 17. So it was very much a journey. The writing process was a journey, physically, emotionally, and craft-wise. I changed over the years in terms of what I wanted to say and what I wanted to focus on. As a younger writer, this book never would have been the book that it became, because I was much more concerned with things that younger women are concerned about: opening doors, how am I going to, reinvent myself, who am I about? And then as I, watched, you watch your children grow, and, they graduate, and, they go off to college, it really does put a fine point on time. So, I always say there is no writing life. I think a lot of times there's a lot of fantasy around what a writer should do, and be. There's a lot of rules, that we're all supposed to be aspiring to. But, I don't believe that there's a writing life. There's just your life and how writing fits into it. And, things work out the way they're supposed to. When you're in a place where you can sit down and work on things, you do it, and then when you're preoccupied or having to stop and do other things, you do that. I actually put Creatures of Passage aside for off and on for many years. The coffee break was writing Time of the Locust. That was like a coffee break from Creatures of Passage. And I felt that book took about 2.5 years, maybe 2 years. Every book is a different mountain. I don't know if the next book is going to be short or long. I try not to look at the clock. I try to focus on the art of the book. And I think my writing process is very organic, a lot like painting, because my mother was a painter and a singer and songwriter. So a lot of my way of looking at a story is like a big mural. And I know when it's finished when I stand back and look at it and say, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So it's like a big mural. But it did take the youngest boy is definitely the clock for Creatures of Passage. But I take that in stride. I say, well, yeah, it took however long. That's how long it took, and it was ready when it was ready. So for all of us writing, things are ready when they're ready, to happen. Is how we have to look at it, and stop looking at others, because everyone has their own path. They have their own way, their own journey, and all we can do is encourage each other. But it's not a horse race, where we can just crank it out. At least I can't. I to be a certain way before I release it.
If I may ask a follow-up, I don't want to hog it up, but I'm just so curious. With me,
I love talking to you, so that's fine.
With me, I kind of hunting, pecking a sentence here, a sentence there over time. And sometimes I had like emotional obstacles to the writing. Okay. But I would say there was a specific turning point. It's kind of a cliche, but a couple years ago, I did rent a cabin, like basically a cabin for 2 or 3 days where I reread the manuscript and kind of organized my thoughts. And I look back now as that was a huge turning point for me. Did you have a similar turning point where you felt like there was just like enough that the snowball started to roll down the mountain faster, or did it feel like a steady state of creation the whole time?
I would say the latter. It wasn't a steady. There were bouts of steadiness.
Okay.
And then there was a snow. There were times where I was on a roll, or I felt like I was on fire. But I have never had the luxury of the cabin,
just the one time I did.
Yeah, there's no cabin, there's no fire, there's no mahogany desk, there's $3,000 or $5,000 typewriter. There's none of that. For me, it was just like the computer, blank screen, late night. I was an insomniac for many, many years. So just up. I was up anyway. So I used those hours. A lot of it was depending on the ages of our boys and what they were doing. So, dinner's in the oven, oh, I have a block of time, or they're asleep, Later during the snowball effect, when they began to be engaged in all of their own activities, and, now they're off in their own stuff. So, there wasn't as much constant interruption. So I usually use the wee hours of the morning or very late at night. With Time of the Locust, I wrote a lot of that first book in the tub because they were younger. And mom's in the tub. We can't bother mom. Mom's in the tub. That was the house rule. So I knew I could guarantee get a 2-hour block because my husband was like, don't bother her. So, but what I'm saying is the writing kind of shaped and fit into whatever was going on in life. And then, of course, during tough times, where you're just so emotionally spent, sometimes that fed my writing. And sometimes I had to say, I'll come back to it, when I'm ready. It would be in the back burner of my mind. So Creatures of Passage is one of those stories that was in the back burner, always cooking, swirling around. And I always have a process where I write different parts of the book at once. So it's not a linear process. It's like that mural. So I'll say, okay, I feel like I can work on this, green part over here or this red part over here kind of thing.
Fantastic. Well put.
And it's like you're just pulling the curtain back on your writing process, and the chat is lit because they're like, yeah, steady, we get it. It's a life that so many people have. Like you have a full life, and you're writing in the midst of that, not off it. I've got this 10-week journey in this really great place. People drop food off 3 times a day, and I can just, crank out whatever it might be. And so I think it's so helpful for all of us who are trying to create anything to know that we're creating while we're doing so many other things.
While we're living.
Tub writing is going to be a big thing now. Bathtub writing. That's going to be the
gel pen. Make sure you have a gel pen and a clipboard.
Clipboard. Okay, I was wondering about that.
Because you can balance that off the edge of the tub.
Okay.
It works.
That's fantastic.
Well, one of the questions while we're talking about the writing process is where do you get your ideas for your writing? I mean, we hear some of it is the context, the geography of Washington, D.C. And as I told you before we started that my parents are from Washington, D.C., right? And so I've always felt like the part I see on TV is some other part because it's not the part I grew up knowing. I was like, there's some other part of Washington, D.C. that's got like senators in it. This is the part where all the regular people are who go to corner stores and play hopscotch on the sidewalks, right? And so we know that the context and geography is part of what fuels you, but where do you get the other ideas for your work?
It's crazy. I always had a wild imagination, you know, since I was an only child. So I had a lot of time to read and think about things. And so, but it all kind of goes in the pot, you know, never tell a writer anything, you know, is the joke I make, because you know, I'm often inspired by a lot of the natural world. Nova, I grew up watching Nova, and you know, I always was fascinated by stories about geology and the Earth's crust and the Big Bang, and you know, I collected marbles and rocks and all that kind of stuff. And then later, you know, you learn, you get exposed to different things through just overhearing things on the metro, you know, snippets of conversation. You know, I'll give you an example. I was working a job in Northwest, and I was on the bus one day, and it was one of those just terrible mornings where you're just hating life, right? You just hate your life. And there's a little old lady on the bus, and she said, "It'll be all right." And I always remembered that, you know, because she's one of those people that you come across in an everyday life situation. And she said it was such a knowing that everyone else kind of just stopped and looked at her, you know, and it's things like that go into the pot. I read a lot. I've always enjoyed technology, reading about different technology. Some of that was related to work, and some of it was my own interest. You know, capoeira, my kids and husband did capoeira for many, many years. So, you know, you get exposed to more of the diasporan cultures. I was an exchange student in Japan when I was in college. And when you learn another language, you get a different kind of thinking. So from the Japanese language, I learned you know, they focus on what you don't say. They don't look at what you say. They listen to what you don't say. So the tone of the conversation, the unsaid, is very much the dialogue. And so I think a lot of those types of things informed my writing. I was a White House intern, you know, during the Clinton era. So during that time, you get a sense of, you know, I was very fortunate because I worked under an African-American, very, very well-established political leader. And, you know, you learn the relationships of power. Washington is about power and proximity to power. So all of those things come into play, I think, in forming writing, just like anyone, we're all the sum of all the experiences that we've had and the people we've been exposed to and the things we've read.
I would love to circle to kind of like gave birth to this entire series, which was the idea that, wow, times are pretty tough right now, and we need a community to kind of get through this together. So that's kind of how we created this webinar series. And it's so interesting because so much of Octavia's writing is about adaptation, you know, landing on your feet, figuring a way out of no way. So I wanted to just sort of ask you how 2020 specifically forced you to adapt. What was created in the wake of 2020, both good and bad, perhaps?
Yeah, good and bad. Yeah, it was a rough year. I mean, what can I say? But I mean, the fear alone was so pervasive. But then I have to admit, you know, in our conversations at home, it actually brought us all very, you know, much closer. We began to really focus on and appreciate the little things, the fact that, you know, we can be together and reach out. And it also put a fine point on the lives of Black people in this country anyway. I mean, in many ways, we live a horror movie since the day we were dropped off on the boats here. You know, our experience is a horror show in this country, and has been and continues to be. So we actually used that in conversation with each other to And my dad did too, talking to my dad on the phone. He was like, look, we've been through a lot. He could run down the tape of all the different eras and, what he had to go through, as an educator. And we were able to use that as examples, to our sons. But at the same time, I think African Americans never, ever have the luxury of, we can say, yes, things are getting better in some ways, but that backdrop of what this country means in our context never goes away. So, we don't really have the luxury of kidding ourselves, especially if you have male children, at least in my view. And Tananarive, you know this very well, and this is why it's a refrain in Creatures of Passage. Things can happen to a boy. Mm-hmm. A loaded phrase. Black motherhood and Black parenthood is really the most revolutionary thing we can do, because it's that vision of Octavia Butler of looking past, of Afrofuturism, looking at our situation and being able to extract all of the things that are useful to us in terms of redefining and correcting our own self-image and how we look at the world and looking through our own lens to the future. And our children, of course, represent that, to the highest degree. But yeah, I mean, the fear, you get tired of being afraid, The good thing, and there were bouts of that, it was a yo-yo ride, but we had to say, look, we have to keep going. The universe demands that we move forward. We can't go back. And so that gave us strength. I think it's given a lot of people strength through. And I think the African American community has always had to use that as a driver. I think it was the New York Times review that, it was a great review, but then, they were looking for some hero, in the story. Well, our heroes are staring us in the face every day. Our grandma, that teacher, the dad who's out there trying to, do his best, for his family. I mean, our heroes are all around us. And the victory for us is to continue to move forward, in the face of all of these forces trying to keep us from moving forward, hoping that we go away, hoping that we get, that's our victory. How we win is to continue to move forward, is how I think Afrofuturism really, really, that's the point it really, really makes to me. And in Creatures of Passage, I use time as a character in the story, where the characters know a certain thing in 1977, and then it says many years later and has a passage of what ends up transpiring. And we know in this era very well what happens, but the character doesn't know that. And that's true for us now. We're extrapolating out into the future, and our children and later descendants will say, oh, they didn't know that, in 2021.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's a great segue to one of the questions we got. And, we started this because I was like, wow, the world looks like this science fiction novel that was written, 20 plus years ago. So, what I'm wondering for you, how do you feel about if the things that you write are going to come true or show up in reality, right? 10 years, 20 years. I mean, is it a cautionary tale? Like, I hope it doesn't happen? Or is it, this is the world we could and should be building? Like, would you be freaked out? Would you be happy? A little bit of both?
I think, there's nothing really new under the sun. And one of the things that one of the lessons that I came away with, in, reading up on Egyptology and looking at these different God concepts and myths, is that there's a certain permanence, things, there's a great wheel or pendulum, and it's really it's all about balance throughout the eras and decades. So all of the shenanigans and craziness that we see or experience are a result of other things that have happened before, and I think things that will happen in the future. Should we be afraid? I mean, I don't know if there's a value in having a constant fear of what could happen. We can only know what we can know in any given time, and we do the best we can based on the information we have. And then we have our faith, and we have our belief systems as guide points to navigate, through time. But I have a personal belief that there's a balance. There are rules. There are laws of correspondence, and the pendulum is bound to swing the other way. That's a refrain in Creatures of Passage as well. Some of the things ended up being prophetic that were in Creatures of Passage. Race wars that never start, never end. All kinds of things. But I guess that's what Parable of the Dreamer, that chapter, is about. It's about the permanent state of imbalance or balance. You have the eternal enemy or the eternal opposite, and always depend on people to be who they are. They're not going to be something else. They're going to be who they are. And if we can accept that and understand that, we can then know how we should function and navigate it. Yeah.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up question? And this is, it piqued my ears when you were talking about it the first time, and then you brought it again. So I was like, yes, I have to ask. All right, African gods, right? There's been so much great kind of literary criticism written about how often Black women writers, especially those of you working in this genre, which I'm sure Tananarive will ask you about, invoke African gods into your work, right? Egyptology, we know Oya and Parable of the Sower. Can you tell us something about that choice and the significance of it for you?
Oh, yeah, sure. To me, Egyptology is the oldest and greatest and deepest well. All the stories, all the myths come out of Egyptology, period.
Right?
Period. Now the narrative will say other things, but the fact is you can draw, the same core, you can see the same themes in almost every storytelling throughout time. But culturally, it's important. I felt it was important for us to embrace the things that we can draw from, the wells that we can draw from. And that's particularly important for the African diaspora, because we have a forced narrative, a forced identity placed, an overlay on us, and we're constantly in a state of trying to peel that back and deprogram and correct and fix wipe the smudge off the lens so we can look at ourselves clearly. But it's a rich, Egyptology is very rich, and so there's many myths that you can use and understand certain concepts from. And I just had a marvelous time with that. Nephthys Kinwell, who's the cab driver, so to speak. Nephthys is one of the 5 sibling gods. Osiris is another one, but I chose those two because of their characteristics. Nephthys as a friend of the dead, a friend, a ferryman, helping people or souls travel through. So she does that with her cab. And I think many people do that in other ways, not just a cab, but, teachers are a kind of ferryman. Storytellers are a kind of ferryman, helping us to understand our world. Osiris, who was murdered and divided into bits and pieces, that happens in the story, but it's in an African-American context of what Black men are up against and have been victim to in the country. He comes back as a ghost then to rectify that. So, you have Find Out, who's another character. He doesn't have an Egyptian name, but I named him in the way that many Black people name folks in neighborhoods, based on, we call him Find Out because he finds things, he'll find out. But he's really Anubis, the god of lost souls. So, I think I encourage and love when Black storytellers use African concepts. As a matter of fact, and Tananarive, you probably don't remember this, but many, many years ago, I was so happy to meet you at Medgar Evers College, because, if anyone has ever read My Soul to Keep, I remember reading that. And this was long before I thought about, writing a novel. This is us. This is our stuff that we can use and imagine through and understand and define ourselves with. It's just fantastic. It empowers us, and I don't see any reason, not to use. Everyone else is using it. Everyone except us in a lot of cases. So I think we can and should take ownership of our stories and our definitions of what greatness is.
Beautiful answer. As I have another question, not really related, but I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier. One of the aspects of Afrofuturism that I love is that it is both forward thinking and backward thinking.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no such thing as just the past or just the future, or just the present. All three are one space. So much like Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust is set in the past. And it is about preserving memories, much as you're preserving memories of your grandmother as that cab driver. Right. It's also very much about what it takes to move forward, what it takes to move ahead. So bearing that in mind, we've just been through a dystopian year. Octavia has that nugget of hope in Parable of the Sower. That is her Earthseed Parables. That's our ferryman in her book, right? To get us through. Who and what serve as your ferryman as a person, as an artist? Because, as you get older, you do get a bit dimmer view of people and humanity. And so where's your hope embedded? Who or what is your ferryman or ferrymen, so that you keep hope?
I couldn't agree with you more about the past, present, and future being, fused. And I love that about Afrofuturism. It's my mother passed away when I was right before I graduated college.
That's
right?
hard. That's very hard.
That's like the worst, one of the worst times you can lose a parent. And she was my hero. I mean, she was, she was a goddess to me. And so losing her had a very profound effect. However, when she was dying, because she knew she was dying, we had a series of conversations. And she would say things like, you can reach me even after I'm gone. I'll be able to, I'll be here. I'll be in your heart. You'll be able to reach me. She wanted to make sure that I understood that. And so I think our family members who we have in our lives and who we have lost are our ferrymen. Sometimes you can hear that little voice that'll say, it'll be all right. Like the lady on the bus. But she could have been a relative that came through and said something like that to me, just for me that morning when I was hating life and hating, the world. Mm-hmm. And that faith in our own ability. I think one of the things I really love about Afrofuturism is it's the insistence that we do have a future. We are part of the future. If we go back and look at our past, our past goes back millennia. We were here, Alpha and Omega. So you can't have one without the other.
No.
So, as much as other narratives would love and have a whole bunch of wishful thinking that we won't be here, the math does not support that.
That part.
It's all math. We're here. We were here. We're going to be here.
Gonna be here.
Gonna be here.
We're gonna be here.
And even beyond that, to concepts we're not familiar with yet, we'll still be here.
And even beyond that, I was really exploring that with Osiris in the book, because he lost his wife, but as a ghost, his journey continues.
Right.
maybe she's out there somewhere, he's saying, and I think that, if we could just remember our own greatness, that can be our light, that can be our beacon and our faith in each other, to recognize that the stuff that's constantly pervasive in telling us that we're not is someone else's wish for us. That has nothing to do with who we are and who we believe we are. And it's a constant deprogramming. We have to deprogram and wash off and bleach, and disinfect that every single day, So the traveling and seeing other parts of the world helps. Talking to each other helps, where we can remind ourselves of who we are, looking back at what we've done, how we're capable. I think it was Cicely Tyson, who we just recently lost,
Yes.
said one time, if you can be Black and live, you can do anything.
Yes.
Do anything,
Oh my goodness, yes.
And I said, yeah, that made a lot of sense to me, But it's not easy, nobody said it was going to be easy, but, I believe if we keep at it, if we recognize the distances that we've already traveled, I mean, no one has ever had to come through what we've had to come through, and if we can get through that, there are other things that we can get through. And just, I had a one hero I had, he was Dell Jones. He was a historian and writer, and we knew him personally, my husband and I, before we had kids. But he used to constantly tell us, he said, tell the children the truth. Just tell them what happened. Don't give them a Disney-esque view or, United Colors of Benetton. Tell them the truth, so that they can come into the world with clear eyes and a clear understanding of themselves and know how to navigate, and create new paths for others and sow new seeds. That's the thing I loved about the earth seed, planting seeds. We're planting seeds every day. It might seem small, but one day it's going to be a baobab tree. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Great. Beautiful.
Well, since you mentioned Earthseed, one of the things we've talked about a lot, especially since the beginning, and we're now coming up on a year, is about your go bag, right? And this has just come up so much in the last year, especially in this very literal sense. Because, Lauren had her bag and she was like, I'm ready. I've been thinking about this. I'm on the go. What's in your go bag? It could be either your metaphorical, right, go bag or your literal one.
Or the one you should have.
Right. Well, the meaning to put together, right?
Yes.
But if you were, what would you need to survive when it all goes to hell?
Jump in the car and run, or on foot.
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up, because sometimes you watch the news and then you have dark thoughts of, what if we need to get out of here?
Yes.
And it's like, you wish you could have a knapsack with a roll of cash and passports and all this kind of stuff, but that might not be feasible or possible. So, I said, and we're still working on this, which is a place of safety, defining a place to go, a rendezvous spot, a checkpoint, would all know to go and to recollect and to collect ourselves. I think for many of us, we kind of do that on a daily basis, just trying to live in this country anyway, going through all kinds of hell outside our home. And so our home was kind of that checkpoint. I think our go bag, is as long as we're together, it's probably more metaphorical for me. As long as we're together and we have, faith in looking out for each other, we'll figure out what to do next. Because sometimes you can't really know, what's coming down the pike. But if you know your situation in the country, you know who your foes are, and you know who's on your side and who's not, it helps you make a plan a lot clearer with less false presumptions, going into it. People are going to disappoint, but I think that if we can recognize that, if we can believe and work towards moving forward, and sometimes that can just be, getting up and paying bills and moving through the day. Sometimes that's the plan, to get to the next day. Other times it's, I'm going to finish this chapter, For me, there were times where I would say, I'm going to keep the rights to this. If I hold the rights to this, my children will then they'll then own. It'll be something for them to own. We don't have a farm. We didn't get the 40 acres and a mule, but we have these rights to this creative piece kind of thing. So there are many different go bags, I think, that we would have to make according to our circumstances. But I think our destination point at some point has to be a collect. We have to get a sense of, where we're going. And I think Afrofuturism, certainly Octavia Butler's work, really contemplated that question and tried to get us to think about that. What about after this falls?
The terrible thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there were studies last year that people who do, well, in this case, it was horror, but I think they would also work for any kind of dystopian fiction. The people who like that kind of fiction did a little better job emotionally when the times did get rough.
Yeah.
But I'm noticing, as I just passed my 2-week point after my second vaccination, so I feel free. Okay. I went to a movie last night without being in sheer terror.
Wow.
But when I tell you terror, okay, I still have all the guidelines for COVID on the back of my door, because I'm a hypochondriac. So every scratchy throat, every, you name it, I have the thermometer, I have the, everything, all the materials. And I realize now that I'm fully vaccinated, it's not that I'm throwing all caution to the wind. I'll still be masking in a lot of places. I still have to remember to wash my hands and all that stuff. But I'm realizing there was this place that daily fear, real daily fear, was taking up in my life that I'm not feeling as acutely in some ways, although I know that we're still far from perfect. And I'm wondering if you have that sense of is there any sense of a boulder of fear, being removed, and what is going into its place? Or are you still kind of feeling that knot, you're not letting that knot of fear go right now yet?
Yeah, I'm one of those nervous Nelly types.
Okay.
The contingency thing, it drives my husband nuts, because he's like, but you can't predict, there's nothing you can do. But yeah, the fear, I have my second COVID shot next week. So I don't have, I still have a lot of fear, but not as much. But, sadly, and this is getting back to what I was talking about at the beginning.
Perfect.
When that pervasive, pandemic, unbelievable situation, when that's removed, we still are left with those fears that were already there. If my son takes I'm going to the store, Mom. Man, I'm already looking at my watch. I'm paranoid. It's late. It's dark. Where is he? He didn't answer my text. Right. He has to go somewhere. What if something happens? All of those fears for our health. We're under so much stress constantly. We have had to learn how to live with fear. And unfortunately, it's become normal. Mm-hmm. So a pandemic, you have something that's so crazy that happens, you can kind of put that in the background for a minute. But then when it comes back to the fore, it reminded me and made me angry for a minute when I realized just how much everyday fear we live with, that I live with. And it's not fair and it's not right, And so, where do you go from there? You recalibrate again. Okay, well, this is lower, this is higher.
Yes. Oh my God. You just
You
brought
know
it
what
all.
I'm talking about.
You
I'm sure
brought it
you know.
all home to me there with that
Yeah.
anecdote, because my son is very fearful of COVID. So he's been in the house most of the time. But like one time he wanted to go play basketball at the park with his friends.
Yeah.
And I wasn't afraid of him getting COVID, honey. I was afraid for my 6'5", 240-pound, 17-year-old Black son to be out in
That's right.
public as a magnet for anyone who feels some kind of way about
Target
difference. And I realized, oh, this again. Like, it's like I have forgotten the old fear because
for a minute. Yeah, for a little while. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes, that's so true. So you have to calibrate. You're absolutely right. One goes down, the other one rises, and we have to try to stay centered, and that's the battle.
So in many ways, we're all superhuman, and we're all fabulous in that way, because we that's what we have to do.
That's what we do.
We have to do. We do that on a daily basis. Others are made out of glass. One thing goes wrong. Other groups in this society, they don't have to go through that. So they're made out of glass. If something doesn't go right, and they fall apart. We don't have the luxury of falling apart. We've got to continue to recalibrate. Should it stay that way? No, that shouldn't be a natural state for us. And Afrofuturism is concerned with us redefining that in our conditions and what we have to put up with and what we're willing to go after,
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just love how your language of this ferryman, right? They were all going to have to find our ferry people, right? Whoever is going to be the one who is helping us get from not just A to B, but right, be the carrier of our souls in the midst of these times of shifting fears.
Yeah, absolutely. But we got to keep going. We have to move forward, and we have to move forward with a plan. Okay, next step. What are we going to do based on these conditions? So, I mean, living in, emergency conditions for centuries.
Well,
I think anyway.
This is great.
So glad you've joined us today. This has been really great. I want people to know where to find you. So we've got a slide for that.
Oh, great, because I always forget.
Here we are.
So thank you.
Go to the website, see the reviews.
Forgive my typo.
Learn more. Oh,
yeah,
it's like an ancient calligraphy, G.
Freudian.
That's right.
It's completely Freudian. In fact, it should be a word, and I say it is one now. But anyway,
it is one.
go to the website, learn more about this fantastic book and all of her work. Thank you so much for sharing your process and your insights with us on the webinar today.
It's been a pleasure. I was really looking forward to this. And you two are wonderful people. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming. And I see, Monica, you were moving on to the next slide.
So, Tananarive, will you share about our workshop?
So we started with this webinar series, and out of that, we recognized that some people wanted to reinforce the once a month format with another chance to gather and talk in a more intimate way where you can be on camera or share your stories and trials. So we have what's called Saving Ourselves, Shaping Change workshop. So basically we talk about the 7 steps of Octavia's method of shaping change, ongoing discussion of her work and influence as it plays out in our lives, an e-journal with monthly writing prompts, interaction with us. It's a little bit more personal, not just in the chat, a social media group that helps us build and sustain that community. And as a sign-up bonus, there's this interview that my husband, Stephen Barnes, and I did with Octavia Butler back in 2000. And we send you a copy of that so you can hear it. So yeah, check out the Saving Ourselves, Shaping Change workshop at www.octaviawebinar.com. We're actually meeting on a week from today, on Saturday.
Yes, if you join in the next week, we'll see you there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, again, thank you all so much for joining us.
Yes, we love being able to do these webinars and to share our mutual love for Octavia, and also the great many artists who also loved her and continue to do amazing work in their own right, like Morowa right here. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. This is wonderful. Much
Great.
appreciated.
So glad you could come.